Chapter 2566, Mouths Ajar. Chapter 2566, Mouths Ajar. Seeing Shifeng step forward and chant an incantation, Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were stunned. He still wants to fight. Confusion changed Blue Rainbow's expression when Shifeng showed no intention of retreating. The difference between their combat power was clear for all to see. The Dark World's invading army was far too strong for any individual power to stop. Based on Shifeng's behavior, however, he intended to stay in this fight. Blue Rainbow struggled to understand. During its investigations, Dark Rhapsody had obtained quite a bit of detailed information on Zero Wing from the main continent's superpowers and knew the guild had a plethora of astounding trump cards. The Ring of Gospel, a domain treasure, was one of them. When activated on a large battlefield, it had proven miraculously effective. Not only did the Ring of Gospel have large AoE skills, but they were also considerably powerful. However, the ring's effects on this battlefield would be very limited. Zero Wing currently faced Tier 3 personal guards and Tier 4 summoned creatures. After all, they had incredible resistance to suppression effects. Moreover, more than 50 Tier 4 summoned creatures had joined the fight. Even if the Ring of Gospel could suppress them, a measly 1,000 plus Tier 3 NPCs wouldn't be enough to stop them. The invading army also had over 3,000 Tier 3 personal guards to support it. Even Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa, who watched from a hidden location, were confused. What is Black Flame trying to do? Is he going for broke? They had only come to get a glimpse of the Dark World's strength. They had never dreamed that they'd witness a large-scale war between Zero Wing and the Otherworld. They had been unprecedentedly shocked after seeing Zero Wing's combat power. No one had expected the guild to have the strength to stand up to a force that included every expert from an entire other world. Moreover, Zero Wing had even successfully deterred the Dark World's experts. The guild's strength was unbelievable. When they recalled the relatively amicable relationship between their Extreme Light Shelter and Shelter 1, they breathed a sigh of relief. If Zero Wing wanted to, its Night Division alone was more than capable of flattening the entire Dark Den. On the other hand, Zero Wing's current opponents were bona fide Tier 3 NPCs and Tier 4 mythic monsters. With such a large difference between the two sides' combat power and numbers, retreating to Stone Forest City was the wisest move Zero Wing could make. Every one of those Tier 3 knights was a part of Zero Wing's foundations, and if they were slain, Zero Wing would be crippled. Zero Wing had already proven its strength. Once news of this battle spread, the various superpowers that wanted to capture Stone Forest City would back down. The Dark World's players and powers wouldn't underestimate Zero Wing again. In fact, they might even avoid offending the guild's members in Cold Spring Forest. While Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa were fraught with confusion, something suddenly changed above the valley. A phantom world gradually descended, growing as it grew closer to the valley floor. In less than 3 seconds, not only had the phantom world grown large enough to cover the battlefield, but it also enveloped the spectating players, including Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa, in the distance. The instant they felt the phantom world's power, both Graceful Moon and Purple Rakshasa felt out of tune with the world around them. It felt like they had become enemies with their surroundings. Not only had their physiques started to weaken, but they also lost a significant portion of their basic attributes. The Phantom World's power also seemed to affect the Tier 3 personal guards and Tier 4 summoned creatures. They had slowed considerably, and their auras even seemed significantly weaker. What did he do? Blue Rainbow gaped, shocked when she realized how much the Tier 3 NPCs and Tier 4 monsters had been suppressed. She had experienced domain's effects before, which tended to be much weaker than magic barriers. The stronger the target was, the less the domain would suppress it, yet Shifeng's domain had destroyed everything she thought she knew about the mechanic. Normally, not even intermediate magic arrays could suppress Tier 4 monsters to this extent, but within Shifeng's domain, their auras had weakened considerably. This domain could practically rival advanced magic barriers, and it was so massive that it covered the entire valley. She had never heard of such a powerful domain. Before anyone could react, however, Shifeng began another incantation. Ring of Brilliance. When he finished his chant, a light rippled across the battlefield, stunning every dark player in the area. Crap. This is cheating. Magic Flash cursed aloud, glaring at Zero Wings Night Division. The intensity of those knights' auras had skyrocketed, and the combined energy made them feel as if they were truly a legion of Tier 4 monsters. The knights' mental states had also visibly improved. They looked nothing like they had a few moments ago. The sudden development caused an uproar among the various guilds and adventurer teams' upper echelons, who commanded the Tier 3 personal guards and Tier 4 summoned creatures, and they halted their advance, exchanging looks. A deathly silence had fallen over the Dark World's invading army, and the passion and killing intent they had radiated was nowhere to be seen. "Do you wish to continue this fight?" Shifeng calmly asked after sweeping his gaze over the dark players before him. This time, not one dark player dared to speak up. They simply stared back with angry, reluctant looks. Fight? More like suicide. Determined, they had revealed every trump card they had previously hidden, and yet, thanks to the Ring of Gospel's 2 skills, they hadn't even shortened the gap between their strength and Zero Wings. Rather, it had only grown. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Since no one responded to his question, Shifeng turned to Dawn Dominance, who still succumbed to his shock. Guild Leader Dawn, since you can speak on behalf of the Dark World, may I know if you wish to continue this battle? Shifeng asked, smiling at the robust man. Dawn Dominance's countenance turned ashen when he heard the question, and he was at a complete loss for words. If he chose to fight, he'd be sacrificing himself and his guild to oblivion. He had dispatched every Tier 3 personal guard world domination owned for the sake of driving the other guilds and adventurer teams into action. If just one of those NPCs died, his guild would suffer a huge blow. If they all died, world domination wouldn't survive. However, nothing would remain of world domination's hard-won prestige in the Dark World if he admitted defeat. Chapter 2567, Suppressing an Army of Millions. Chapter 2567, Suppressing an Army of Millions. Upon hearing the question Shifeng directed at Dawn Dominance, silence fell over the battlefield as the various powers' upper echelons turned to look at world domination's guild leader, who served as the Dark World's representative. Zero Wings' strength had far exceeded their expectations. The guild possessed not only an incredibly strong knight division but also a domain treasure capable of significantly suppressing even Tier 4 creatures. The combination of the 2 cards meant no power could threaten Zero Wings' Knight Legion at this stage of the game. For a time, silence reigned over the Dark World's army of several millions because of Shifeng's words. This situation stupefied Magic Flash and the others, who were spectating the battle from afar. Arrogance. Ignorance. When Magic Flash and the others thought back to the opinions they had of Shifeng, they realized how ridiculous those were. At the same time, they celebrated inwardly. This was because they finally saw for themselves what a true monster was today. Previously, in their opinion, single-handedly going up against thousands of enemies simultaneously could already be considered a legendary feat. In fact, 99% of the people who claimed to be capable of such a feat were undoubtedly spouting nonsense. As expert players, Magic Flash and his companions knew just how difficult it was to go up against thousands of enemies simultaneously, especially in a large-scale guild war. The enemy side would definitely have numerous expert players amidst their forces. Trying to fight against thousands in such a situation ramped up the difficulty. Now, however, not only did this legendary feat happen right before their very eyes, but the scale of this feat had even been magnified by 1,000. Shifeng had single-handedly suppressed an army of millions. Due to just this one scene, they could say with certainty that the name of Black Flame would shake the entire Dark World in the future. Is he really human? Purple Rakshasa's heart pounded rapidly as she took in the army of millions remaining motionless before Shifeng. At this moment, she earnestly doubted Shifeng was human. He had intimidated several million expert players and several thousand Tier 3 NPCs. Although Shifeng's previous performance at the Extreme Light Shelter had already been plenty shocking, that feat was nothing compared to this. Even standing a great distance away, she had still shuddered upon sighting the army of millions. Shifeng, however, had single-handedly silenced these several million experts. The power and influence he wielded were simply inhuman. It seems Shelter 1 no longer has to worry about its development from now on, Graceful Monarch said, a bitter smile forming on her face as she gazed at Blue Frost, one of her rivals in the Dark Den. Originally, Graceful Monarch thought that, with Crimson Emperor's help, the Extreme Light Shelter could surpass Shelter 1 in the Dark Den. In light of the turn of events, however, that was categorically impossible. Zero Wing was a guild capable of suppressing an entire world's players to the point where they didn't even dare to breathe. Once news of this feat reached the Dark Den, the experts that revered strength would definitely do everything they could to join Shelter 1 and Zero Wing. Moreover, Shifeng had previously displayed extraordinary individual strength in the Dark Den. With these two factors combined, Shelter 1 would surely become a sacred land for Dark Den's experts. After the silence on the battlefield persisted for some time, Dawn Dominance walked up to Shifeng with an incomparably gloomy expression. The pride and fighting spirit he had before were nowhere to be seen now. Guild leader Black Flame, this move of yours is indeed amazing. I'm afraid nobody ever thought that Zero Wing might actually possess so much hidden strength, Dawn Dominance said after taking a deep breath. However, it is wise not to bum one's bridges. I admit that the domain skills you used are very powerful. However, these domain skills will only remain active so long as their user is alive. Once the user dies, the effects of the domain skills will disappear. The Dark World's army might not be a match for your army, but we have plenty of people. We have more than enough manpower to spare to kill you, the user of the domain skills. Of course, I also have to admit that we will suffer plenty of losses before we succeed. However, the final outcome is similarly one that you will not wish to see, Guild Leader Black Flame. Instead of suffering mutual destruction, why don't we each take a step back? Our request is very simple. So long as Zero Wing stops having designs on the teleportation gate, everything else is negotiable. Upon hearing Dawn Dominance's suggestion, realization immediately dawned upon the dark players present. Guild Leader Dawn really is the best. How could we have forgotten such a thing? Due to the immense shock they felt before, one simple thing actually slipped their minds. In God's domain, magic arrays and domain skills required a user to sustain them. Domain tools were no exception. If they killed the player using the tool, then the tool would naturally lose effect. Meanwhile, once the Dark Army no longer suffered under the effects of Miniature World, taking care of Zero Wing would be a piece of cake. However, Dawn Dominance was also correct in that they would have to pay a huge price to annihilate Zero Wing if they continued fighting, and this was not something they wished to see. The best solution now was for both sides to each take a step back. What if I refuse? Shifeng asked, smiling. At Shifeng's words, silence filled the battlefield once more. Lunatic. He's definitely a lunatic. The Dark World has already taken a step back, yet he's still insisting on controlling the teleportation gate. Is he really not afraid of losing everything? The spectating experts of the various superpowers found Shifeng's intransigence insane. Previously, the Dark World's offer to give up on participating in the superpowers fight for Stone Forest City was already plenty shocking. Now, the Dark World was even willing to take another step back and provide Zero Wing with other benefits in exchange for Zero Wing giving up its designs on the teleportation gate. In the eyes of the main continent's various superpowers, this was an unbelievable opportunity, something any power would wish to obtain, yet Shifeng had still rejected it without hesitation. They had no doubt that this was the Dark World's bottom line. There would be no more concessions after this. If Shifeng continued insisting on taking control of the teleportation gate, then Zero Wing really would enter an irreconcilable feud with the Dark World. Guild Leader Black Flame, do you really intend to drag Zero Wing into a fight to the death? Dawn Dominance demanded as he tried to suppress the anger in his heart as much as possible. You'll regret it if that happens. Zero Wing's strength thoroughly exceeded Dawn Dominance's expectations. If both sides continued fighting, the only outcome would be mutual destruction, an outcome he was not willing to see. After all, world domination still needed to develop on the main continent. Without sufficient strength, its efforts would be futile. However, he never imagined that Shifeng would actually be so stubborn as to refuse to take a step back even when given an excellent opportunity to do so. Guild Leader Dawn, there's no need to continue showing Black Flame any respect. Since he doesn't know how to appreciate goodwill, I say that we just teach him a lesson. At worst, will have a slower time developing on the main continent. That's right. Since he doesn't want the goodwill we're showing him, let's just annihilate Zero Wing and be done with this. Let's see what he can do then. The dark players present similarly grew enraged at Shifeng's response. They had already offered a huge concession to Zero Wing, a condition that even super guilds wouldn't dream of obtaining, yet Shifeng had still chosen to reject it. This rekindled the various powers' thoughts of annihilating Zero Wing. A fight to the death. Shaking his head, Shifeng said, "Guild leader Dawn, you're over-exaggerating things. In my eyes, it is, at most, negligible losses." "Good. Since you wish to remain stubborn, you have only yourself to blame, Guild leader Black Flame. Brothers, no need to hold back anymore." Dawn Dominance snarled as he glared at Shifeng in anger. Negligible losses? Such arrogance. Shifeng was simply too arrogant. However, just as the Dark World's army was about to advance once more, Shifeng made his move. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU unsheathing Killing Ray, Shifeng executed a forward slash. Lightning slash. A blue lightning bolt promptly streaked through the area before Shifeng. A bystander would also see a pitch-black spatial tear following closely behind the lightning bolt. Without Dawn Dominance noticing, both the lightning bolt and spatial tear brushed past his body. When the lightning bolt disappeared, the dozen or so Tier 3 experts in its path instantly lost all their HPs. An 18-meter-tall, level 115 mythic monster standing a short distance behind Dawn Dominance was also sent flying and crashing into a bunch of dark players. For a time, deathly silence filled the battlefield. Chapter 2568, Dark World defeated, Zero Wing flourishes. Chapter 2568, Dark World defeated, Zero Wing flourishes. After a short period of stunned silence, a gabble of confusion erupted as everyone present stared at Shifeng in disbelief. What happened? How did he send a Tier 4 summoned creature flying? What did he do? Everyone present had seen Shifeng's actions very clearly. In fact, they even felt that Shifeng had moved very slowly. However, nobody could wrap their heads around what had actually happened. All they had seen was Shifeng executing a forward slash at the empty space before him and releasing a streak of blue light from his sword. And by the time they snapped out of their daze, the Tier 4 summoned creature that stood over 60 yards away from the swordsman was already in the air. He sent a level 115, Tier 4 summoned creature flying with a single hit. Blue Rainbow wore a somber and confused look on her face as she gazed at Shifeng. Just how high are his basic attributes? From previous investigations, she knew that Shifeng possessed ridiculously high basic attributes. Even Rebellious Thunder, who was a demon count and wielded the magic weapon Cruel Darkness, had only a slight edge on Shifeng in this regard. Moreover, that was when Shifeng was in his normal state. In other words, even back then, Shifeng's strength attribute should already rival that of mythic monsters of the same level. Now, however, Shifeng had actually sent a level 115 mythic monster flying with his attack. Something was wrong with this situation. After all, blocking an attack from a mythic monster and sending a mythic monster flying were two entirely different concepts. Unless there was an enormous gap in strength, it was impossible for one to send their opponents flying, yet not only did Shifeng send a mythic monster flying, but it was even a level 115 mythic monster. The current strength he displayed was starkly different from what the reports mentioned. How is this possible? Furious Heart, who was spectating from afar, was similarly stunned by this situation. He had personally witnessed Shifeng's strength before. However, despite so little time having passed since their last meeting, Shifeng could now actually send a level 115 mythic monster flying with his attacks. For a moment, Furious Heart suspected that the main god system was playing a prank on him. With such frightening strength, let alone Tier 3 NPCs, even Tier 4 NPCs would struggle to deal with Shifeng. Needless to say, it would be a fool's dream to hope that a bunch of Tier 4 mythic monsters would defeat him. Monsters generally had very low combat standards. In a situation where the difference in basic attributes was negligible, they would be no different from common monsters in front of even ordinary expert players, let alone a domain realm expert like Shifeng. If all 50+ Tier 4 summoned creatures attacked the swordsman, they would still have an incredibly difficult time inflicting damage on him. Not to mention, Shifeng still had a legion of Tier 3 knights behind him. How did he get so strong? Hell Rush, who stood among Zero Wing's forces, was similarly astounded as he looked at Shifeng. Ever since Netherworld Empire had partnered with Zero Wing, Hell Rush had been following beside Shifeng almost every day. Hence, he had a very good understanding of Shifeng's strength. Moreover, Shifeng had spent much less time grinding than Hell Rush. In fact, Hell Rush had rarely ever seen Shifeng going out to grind for levels, as the man was tied down by all sorts of guild affairs. In contrast, Hell Rush had been frantically grinding every day. And thanks to Stone Forest City's help, not only was he close to reaching level 110 already, but he had even replaced 2 pieces of his equipment thus far. He had also achieved considerable progress in unlocking his mana body. Personally, he deemed that the gap in combat power between himself and Shifeng should have shrunk by quite a bit. However, contrary to Hell Rush's belief, not only had the gap in combat power not shrunk, but it had actually grown instead. As for Dawn Dominance, who originally planned to ridicule Shifeng for his arrogance and ignorance, he was stunned by this unexpected development as well. When he saw the Tier 4 summoned creature sprawled on the ground, his mind froze momentarily. Dawn Dominance had known that Shifeng possessed basic attributes rivaling those of mythic monsters and that the man was considered a peerless monster in God's domain. The swordsman definitely wasn't an existence that ordinary experts could hope to contend with. Even a group of Tier 3 peak experts wouldn't be his match. However, what was up with the current situation? How was Shifeng just a peerless monster? He was much stronger than even Zero Wing's 9 invincible Tier 3 knights. In fact, killing several hundred of Zero Wing's Tier 3 knights would be much easier than killing Shifeng. At this moment, only Shifeng himself remained unfazed by the latest development. In God's domain, weapons played the biggest role in determining a player's combat power. The Abyssal Blade's recent promotion into a fragmented legendary weapon had boosted Shifeng's strength beyond that of level 115 mythic monsters. With the Ring of Gospel's assistance, which weakened the Dark Army's Tier 4 summoned creatures and improved his own basic attributes by a significant margin, it was only natural that he could send a level 115 mythic monster flying. Guild Leader Dawn, do you still wish to continue? Shifeng asked the motionless man before him. This time, Shifeng did not speak that loudly. However, the dark players found his voice unusually ear-piercing and vexing. This was already Shifeng's second time asking them this question. It was as if he was ridiculing them for their previous mockery of him, and they could not help but wish they could charge forward and kill Shifeng right now. Humiliation. This was absolute humiliation. Nevertheless, despite feeling greatly humiliated, none of the dark players present dared to speak up. Instead, they all stared at Dawn Dominance in silence. Meanwhile, after Shifeng repeated his question, an indescribably gloomy expression appeared on Dawn Dominance's face. Black flame. Dawn Dominance gnashed his teeth as he glared at Shifeng. However, aside from calling out Shifeng's name, he couldn't think of anything else to say. In this situation, the upper echelons of the Dark World's various powers sympathized with Dawn Dominance despite themselves. Previously, Dawn Dominance's bid to increase world domination's influence in the Dark World through this war had exasperated the various powers present. This was especially true for Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society. Currently, however, both Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold only felt pity for Dawn Dominance. After all, Shifeng was truly too vicious. By deliberately repeating his question, not only did Shifeng thoroughly humiliate Dawn Dominance, but Dawn Dominance also had no choice but to stomach this humiliation in silence. Guild Leader Dawn, if you wish to continue fighting, I won't object. Only, the outcome will not be within my control, Shifeng said and shrugged as he looked at Dawn Dominance's enraged expression, indicating that he had no qualms whatsoever. Upon hearing Shifeng's words, the upper echelons of the Dark World's various guilds and adventurer teams immediately grew nervous, and they all sent meaningful looks at Dawn Dominance. The Zero Wing members and various superpowers spectating experts present gaped in shock at this sight. The Dark World that had once stricken fear into the main continent's various superpowers was now timorous after a few words from Shifeng. If they were to retell today's tale, nobody would believe them. However, it had happened right before their very eyes. Of course, The various superpowers experts could sympathize with the Dark World's players. The current battle involved the foundations of both sides. If the Dark Army perished, then the Dark World's various powers would lose all the fruits of their efforts, with nothing to show for it. This definitely wasn't an outcome they could accept. Guild leader Black Flame, I admit that you are very powerful. The Dark World will give up on this teleportation gate. However, don't think you can feel pleased for long. You won't be able to defend this teleportation gate forever, Dawn Dominance said after taking in a deep breath. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. As soon as Dawn Dominance finished speaking, he turned around and walked back to the teleportation gate. He had no intention of staying in Cold Spring Forest for even a moment longer. Upon seeing this, the members of the Dark World's powers promptly withdrew to the Dark World as well. None of them chose to remain in Cold Spring Forest. Only a few independent players decided to stay behind and take a look at the situation. Zero Wing won, just like that. Purple Rakshasa was stunned when she saw the Dark World's various powers retreating. For a moment, she felt as if she was dreaming. Against an entire world's experts, Zero Wing had actually emerged victorious. Chapter 2569, Gathering for Nothing? Chapter 2569, Gathering for Nothing? Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City. As news of the Dark World's teleportation gates opening had already spread across the entire Cold Spring Forest, the tension in Stone Forest City had increased, and many of the city's resident players had decided to leave and develop somewhere else. This development left the once bustling city quiet. Stone Forest City's previously crowded Main Street now had less than half the players it originally did. Moreover, it was only because of the newly established Freedom Hotel that this many players chose to remain in the city. However, the majority of these players were actually experts belonging to the various major powers. Very few were independent players. At this time, a group of cloaked players entered the Freedom Hotel's first-floor lobby, the appearance of these players triggering loud discussions among the other players there. The reason for the strong reaction was the secret pavilion's experts guiding this group of nearly 100 cloaked players. Standing at the head of the secret pavilion's experts were the well-known Yuan Taishin and a male half-elf who looked to be in his 40s. Amazing. Who are those people? They're actually being guided by an elder of the secret pavilion. Those people must be big shots of superpowers. I recall that the secret pavilion is a shareholder of Stone Forest City. Now that the Dark World's players have entered Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City faces a very bleak future. Those cloaked people might be reinforcements the secret pavilion recruited. Reinforcements? What's the point of calling in reinforcements? That's an entire world we're talking about. That's not something any individual superpower can go up against. Even multiple superpowers working together won't be able to stop the Dark World's invasion. The various major powers experts in the lobby were eaten up with curiosity as they discussed the identities of the cloaked experts. Nowadays, Stone Forest City was already a holy land for players who wanted to develop themselves. After all, the city boasted not only an incredibly high mana density but also the Freedom Hotel, which greatly amplified the rate at which players accumulated the double EXP buff. It was even rumored that the Freedom Hotel's top-floor rooms could accelerate the removal of foreign energy from one's body and increase the efficiency of one's training in combat techniques. In the current era, where combat techniques had become more commonly available in God's domain, the Freedom Hotel's functions held a fatal temptation to expert players. If a power could develop their expert players using the Freedom Hotel's functions over long periods, the development speed of said power would reach unimaginable heights. Since the secret pavilion was one of Stone Forest City's shareholders, the guild naturally wouldn't give up on the city without a fight. Only, now that the Dark World's teleportation gate was open, the various major powers experts found it inconceivable that any power could stop the Dark World's players. Please wait a moment. I'll go rent an advanced reception room, Yuan Taishin said to the cloaked players behind him. He went up to the front desk and presented a gold card to the receptionist there. And upon seeing the card, the various major powers' upper echelons were green with envy. The Freedom Hotel's gold membership card. Due to the Freedom Hotel's amazing functions, the various major powers all sought membership in the Freedom Hotel, the higher, the better. However, doing so was incredibly difficult. Even now, those major powers had managed to gain only a bronze membership. If they wished to elevate their membership status to silver, they would need to accumulate a large number of contribution points in the Freedom Hotel, which could be acquired only by selling rare materials and doing quests. Moreover, each player could sell only a limited amount of materials per day. Meanwhile, a gold membership allowed players to rent the rooms on the Freedom Hotel's top floor. While Yuan Taishin was handling the rental procedures, the cloaked players standing behind him studied the Freedom Hotel's interior. "So, this is Zero Wing's Freedom Hotel? This place really is amazing," said a cloaked, male youth radiating dense darkness energy. He sighed ruefully when he sensed the density of the mana inside the hotel and the mana's effects. "It's no wonder Zero Wing dared to offend our guild before. So what if Zero Wing dared to offend us?" In the end, Zero Wing still lost to Vice Guild Leader Light, a level 109 elementalist standing beside the male youth and similarly radiating darkness energy said disdainfully. This time, the secret pavilion had not only taken the initiative to invite the various superpowers that Demon's Heart had secretly partnered up with but also extended an invitation to Demon's Heart. One could easily imagine the dire-ness of Zero Wing's current situation. Unfortunately, even if the secret pavilion stepped forward this time, it couldn't do much to change the outcome of this war, as the various superpowers present were hell-bent on obtaining Stone Forest City. As the two experts from Demon's Heart quietly conversed with each other, Illusory Words, who similarly stood among the cloaked players, wore a frown on her face. "Illusory, it seems the chances of Zero Wing surviving are slim. So many superpowers have actually gathered to obtain Stone Forest City. I doubt even the secret pavilion expected such a development," the fierce man standing beside Illusory Words said, sighing. The secret pavilion had invited all the superpowers targeting Stone Forest City to the negotiations. Crimson Emperor had estimated that 6 or 7 superpowers, at most, had their eye on Stone Forest City. However, the actual number turned out to be more than 10. Even Battle Wolves, which had an irreconcilable feud with Demon's Heart, had decided to join in the fray. If these superpowers banded together, they would have a minimum of 4,000 Tier 3 experts with very high combat standards. If they worked together with the Dark World's forces and attacked Stone Forest City from both the inside and outside, Stone Forest City wouldn't stand a chance. Of course, the fierce man could also understand why the various superpowers were willing to go to such lengths to obtain Stone Forest City. After all, the advantages the city brought were simply amazing. This was especially true for the Freedom Hotel. No superpower would pass up the Freedom Hotel's benefits. Moreover, Zero Wing had even taken the initiative to meet the Dark World's army at the teleportation gate. That was simply suicide. Now, even if all of the 5 great super guilds banded together, they still wouldn't be able to save Zero Wing. At this moment, let alone Illusory Words and the fierce man from Crimson Emperor, even Yuan Taishin, who had invited the various superpowers secretly targeting Stone Forest City, was surprised by this situation. He never thought that there would be more than 10 superpowers targeting Stone Forest City this time. Aside from Demon's Heart and Starlink, which bore deep hatred for Zero Wing, the superpowers included the 10 Saints Empire's Demon Palace, the Shadow World's Shadowless Empire, and the Super Guilds Battle Wolves and Pantheon. Not to mention, Mythology, one of the 5 great super guilds, which wasn't present among the superpowers he invited, was sure to be taking action in secret against Stone Forest City as well. If all these superpowers worked together, they could shake the entire eastern continent, what more a measly Stone Forest City. For a moment, Yuan Taishin could not help but doubt if the negotiations this time would truly yield any results. Ha ha ha. Zero Wing is doomed now. Troubled Times, who had come with Flaming Light, could not help but grow ecstatic as he took in the various superpowers representatives around him. With so many superpowers gathered here, even a super guild won't be able to stop the upcoming assault. Previously, when Shifeng had publicly executed Troubled Times in Demon City, not only did Troubled Times' strength diminish greatly, but his reputation in the Dark Den had also fallen into ruin. Originally, Troubled Times thought that he wouldn't have an opportunity to get revenge on Zero Wing. However, his chance had come so quickly. "Everyone, the reception room is ready." Please follow me, Yuan Taishan said to the cloaked group behind him. However, just as Yuan Taishan was about to lead the group to the Freedom Hotel's top-floor reception room, a figure suddenly appeared before him. The other players present in the lobby gaped in shock at the development. The players the secret pavilion invited might be hiding their identities, but they had not done anything to conceal their auras, and their auras made it clear that every one of these people was a peak expert or above. Anyone that dared to stand in their path had to be tired of living. However, someone actually dared to do so. Moreover, this person was a woman wearing Zero Wings emblem, and her level was only a pitiful 100. Miss Melancholic, do you have business with us? Yuan Taishan asked in confusion. He had recognized this woman immediately. This woman was none other than Melancholic Smile, the manager of Zero Wings candlelight trading firm as well as one of the Freedom Hotel's managers. Yuan Taishan had not intentionally tried to conceal the fact that he had invited the various superpowers for negotiations. And in his opinion, Zero Wing should have no reason whatsoever to stop him from doing so. After all, the secret pavilion was one of Stone Forest City's shareholders, and negotiating with the various superpowers could reduce the number of enemies Zero Wing would have to face. Now, however, Melancholic Smile had suddenly appeared before their group. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It's nothing important, Melancholic Smile said, shaking her head. I'm just following the guild leader's instructions to relay a message to these people. Relay a message? Is he taking the initiative to hand over Stone Forest City's shares now that he knows he can't win? Troubled Times asked, laughing in ridicule. Upon hearing Troubled Times' words, the various superpowers experts present also started laughing. With things having reached this point already, wasn't it a little too late for regrets? Our guild leader has stated that if you wish to develop in Stone Forest City with peace in mind, then Zero Wing will welcome you with open arms. However, if you wish to meddle in Stone Forest City's affairs, you'd best return to wherever you came from instead of asking for trouble. Melancholic Smile declared calmly as she swept her gaze across the players before her. Chapter 2570, On the Verge of War, Crazy Zero Wing. Chapter 2570, On the Verge of War, Crazy Zero Wing. At first, the players in the lobby had paid close attention to the mysterious group Yuan Taishan had invited, and Melancholic Smile hadn't tried to keep her voice down. Hence, after her declaration, silence had fallen in the hotel lobby as everyone stared at her in astonishment. What's going on? Those people must be big shots from the various superpowers, yet she dares to speak to them like that. Amazing. Truly amazing. Even now, Zero Wing still behaves so haughtily. Since the day I joined God's domain, I've never seen such a suicidal guild. None of these players were fools, and even though they hid themselves under black cloaks, the individuals Yuan Taishan had invited were clearly from the various superpowers. Moreover, they should be the superpowers' top-ranked experts based on their auras. Now that the Dark World's teleportation gate was active, it would only be a matter of time before dark players flooded into Cold Spring Forest. The entire level 100 neutral map was in danger, as was Stone Forest City. Yet, even in such a dire predicament, Zero Wing continued to maintain its arrogance before the various superpowers. This was just insane. Miss Melancholic, what are you? Yuan Taishan was flabbergasted. He couldn't believe what was happening. If he hadn't been certain that Melancholic Smile wasn't some spy and an actual core member in Zero Wing, who had worked her way up the ranks, he would have suspected otherwise. Her announcement was practically a dare to the various superpowers and would undoubtedly lead to Zero Wing's elimination from Cold Spring Forest. What are Zero Wing's intentions, old Yuan? Scorching Shine asked from beside Yuan Taishan with a frosty look. He had already surmised that the chances of their plan succeeding were very low. Stone Forest City's Freedom Hotel was too tempting to give up, after all. However, it was also the reason that the secret pavilion didn't want other superpowers to stick their fingers in the city. Unfortunately, Melancholic Smile's statement had as good as ruined their plan. No one would be surprised if the various superpowers shed all pretenses with Zero Wing immediately, let alone negotiate. For a moment, Yuan Taishan was speechless. Cold Spring Forest was a lost cause at this point. Even the various superpowers would have a hard time developing in the area, much less Zero Wing. There was simply no way Zero Wing could retain absolute control over Stone Forest City. It'd be a miracle if the guild even kept a portion of the city. Yuan Taishin had worked with Shifeng many times before, so he knew the swordsman was open to persuasion, not coercion. If he insisted that Shifeng gave away a significant portion of the city's shares, their discussion would end on a sour note. Knowing this, he hadn't bothered to contact Shifeng before his negotiation with the various superpowers. He would only try to convince Shifeng once the negotiations had reached a satisfying conclusion. With things as they were now, Zero Wing would have to sacrifice some of Stone Forest City's shares if it wished to survive. Maintaining full control was impossible. But Yuan Taishin had never considered that Shifeng would be ruthless enough to send Melancholic Smile to disrespect the various superpowers so blatantly. He had definitely gone insane this time. Ha ha ha. Interesting. Zero Wing is truly fascinating. Even now, it displays such confidence. It's no wonder why it dares to offend so many superpowers. It seems my visit to Stone Forest City wasn't a waste. An elderly, crimson-eyed man wearing the Shadowless Empire's emblem and holding a scarlet staff said, laughing. Old Lu, do you think Zero Wing is just putting on a brave face? Evil Chelene, who wore Demon Palace's emblem and carried a war axe that radiated strange energy, asked, sneering at the crimson-browed elder. Zero Wing is digging its own grave by provoking us. I think you still have a grudge over losing to Black Flame. Chelene, the crimson-eyed elder shot back, chuckling at the glare Evil Chelene directed his way. Instead of rising to the crimson-eyed elder's teasing, Evil Chelene simply smiled as he said, the situation on Dragonheart Island is one thing, but we're in Cold Spring Forest. Moreover, this won't be some small team battle in the fields. We're talking about a conflict with an entire other world. Zero Wing hasn't tried to win us over, but has sent some nobody to spit in our faces. If that isn't stupidity, what is? Demon Palace's other members nodded in agreement. Due to Zero Wing, Demon Palace's reputation on Dragonheart Island had suffered, but this situation was completely different. More than 10 superpowers had gathered in Stone Forest City. Even without including the Dark Worlds players, there were more than enough hostile players to end Zero Wing's reign. Instead of negotiating for peace, Zero Wing has sent someone to slap the gathered superpowers in the face. The guild must be giving up. After a brief moment of silence, Troubled Time's smile grew into a grin. He then walked up to Melancholic Smile without any hesitation. Lady from Zero Wing, we're here precisely to cause trouble. What are you going to do about it? Troubled Times asked, raising his voice deliberately to ensure that every player in the lobby heard him. Hearing Troubled Times' threat, an uproar shook the lobby. What? Are the various superpowers really going to fight Zero Wing? Zero Wing asked for it. We may be in Stone Forest City, but do you think the various superpowers would let such intentional disrespect slide? Zero Wing truly is doomed now. Now, not only does it have to deal with the Dark World's invasion, but it will also have to face the various superpowers' wrath. The experts that recently joined Zero Wing must deeply regret their decisions. The various major powers members started chatting amongst themselves as they watched the tense conversation play out. They could hardly believe Zero Wing's behavior. None of them had expected the guild to shed all pretenses before the various superpowers representatives. While everyone expected Melancholic Smile to panic, however, she smiled brightly at Troubled Times and replied, if that's the case, Zero Wing will have no choice but to erase you from Cold Spring Forest. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU again, the lobby fell deathly silent. Melancholic Smile's response even stunned Troubled Times. He couldn't understand why she was so bold. Wasn't she supposed to grovel at his feet and beg for mercy? It seems your instincts were wrong this time, Illusory. That girl is just as insane as her guild leader. She's only pushing Zero Wing further down the path of no return, the fierce man from Crimson Emperor said, admiring Melancholic Smile's bravery. Every one of the various superpowers representatives wanted to declare war on Zero Wing that moment. They hadn't found a good excuse to attack Stone Forest City yet, but Zero Wing had just given them the reason they had been searching for. The fierce man looked over, expecting to see Illusory words bitter after misjudging Zero Wing, but he saw that she maintained a neutral expression, focused on a message she had just received. After a moment, she looked up and took a deep breath before informing her companion, "My instincts might have been wrong, but her statement isn't." Chapter 2571. Astonished once more. Hotel in an uproar. What do you mean? Chapter 2571. Astonished once more. Hotel in an uproar. What do you mean? Illusory word statement confused her fierce comrade from Crimson Emperor. What did she mean by her instincts had been wrong, but melancholic smile wasn't? The current situation was clear for all to see, and illusory words had acknowledged that she had misjudged Zero Wing. How could melancholic smile's statement possibly be correct? Zero Wing was struggling to survive. Chasing the various superpowers out of Cold Spring Forest from such a position was a joke. To be precise, my instincts were only partially correct, illusory words explained, chuckling at the fierce man's confused look. It's best if you take a look for yourself. I just received this message from Graceful Monarch. Graceful Monarch? Has something unexpected happened at the teleportation gate? Curious, the fierce man opened the message illusory words had forwarded. Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa had wanted to see the Dark World's teleportation gate themselves and get a clear grasp of the invading army's strength. Zero Wing had also dispatched quite a few players to the gate, and by allowing the two Dark Den players to spectate, they'd find out exactly what Zero Wing intended. In his opinion, Zero Wing was wasting its time in trying to negotiate with the Dark World's various powers, especially once they'd seen the benefits Cold Spring Forest and Stone Forest City had to offer. Regardless of what the guild tried to offer, the outcome wouldn't change. Retaining a small fraction of the city's shares was the best Zero Wing could hope for. It shouldn't dream of holding more power than that. The Dark World's invading army had more than 30,000 Tier 3 experts. No individual power would have the strength to stand up against that. While the fierce man carefully read Graceful Monarch's message, more players had begun to gather in the Freedom Hotel. A large number of independent experts had come to hear what Melancholic Smile had to say. Did she get the wrong message? Dropping all pretense with the various superpowers would only bring Zero Wing more harm. Stone Forest City might not even last 3 days at this rate, much less a week. Galaxy Past, who had just arrived in the Freedom Hotel's lobby, gaped in shock when he heard about Melancholic Smile's interaction with the superpowers representatives. Every player in the city was paying attention to the current situation Zero Wing and Cold Spring Forest faced. Although word of the various superpowers moving against Stone Forest City had long since reached the masses, Galaxy Past still had a hard time believing that Zero Wing would take the initiative to offend the various superpowers. He, too, knew that Zero Wing would never bend to coercion, only persuasion. He also knew that the guild was insane and acted no differently than a gambling addict. Although Zero Wing's crazy bets had been astonishingly successful thus far, its current opponent was on a completely different level than those it had faced before. If Zero Wing moved against the various superpowers now, it would be caught in a dead end. Zero Wing was no longer the guild it had been. It had nearly as many resources and as much territory as the various superpowers. If the guild could stabilize its hold in Stone Forest City and continue to develop in peace, it would only be a matter of time before it became another of God's domain's superpowers. While Galaxy Past found Melancholic Smile's actions perplexing, Demon's Heart's members began to laugh. Troubled Time's laughter, in particular, rang throughout the lobby. He looked at Melancholic Smile as if she were a fool. Truthfully, not even he had expected this development. He had believed this woman would have tried to explain away her statement as a misunderstanding. He had never dreamed that she'd pit herself against the various superpowers directly, removing any room for negotiation. Now that Melancholic Smile had offended the various superpowers, their reputations would suffer if they didn't respond appropriately. Lady from Zero Wing, you certainly are bold. Would you truly kick us out of Cold Spring Forest if we choose to ignore Zero Wing's threat? Do you assume we won't eliminate you just because Zero Wing is the only established guild in Cold Spring Forest? Troubled Times asked, sneering at Melancholic Smile. With things as they were, he didn't mind adding fuel to the fire, ensuring that any trace of Zero Wing would be removed from Cold Spring Forest. It's still going to come down to a fight in the end. Yuan Taishan could not help his bitter smile at Melancholic Smile's fearlessness. Personally, Yuan Taishan admired Zero Wing's future and Shifeng's strength. Moreover, the secret pavilion had gained quite a bit from its partnership with this guild. Hence, he wished to help Zero Wing in any way he could. However, it seemed his recent efforts were for naught. Just as Yuan Taishan was about to give up and try to find another way to deal with the gathered superpowers, a voice called out from a group of cloaked players, echoing throughout the hotel lobby. "Excuse me, Miss Melancholic, but unlike the other superpowers, Battle Wolves is only here in hopes of allying with Zero Wing. I'd like to avoid a misunderstanding." Everyone in the lobby spun to look at the speaker. Several players broke away from the group and removed their black cloaks to reveal their true appearances. A middle-aged man led the small party. It was none other than Sirius, one of the Battle Wolves' 4 great wolf kings. Crap. Battle Wolves has come, too? Sure enough, those cloaked players all have powerful backgrounds, but what is Sirius trying to do? He really doesn't plan to target Stone Forest City. Zero Wing is so lucky. Or maybe the guild has a secret relationship with Battle Wolves, so they've decided to give up on this struggle. Sirius's interruption stunned the players in the lobby. No one had thought that Battle Wolves, a super guild, would forsake the contest for Stone Forest City. Battle Wolves, huh? Even Yuan Taishan was slightly surprised by Sirius's admission, yet he could understand the reason behind it. Battle Wolves and Demon's Heart had an irreconcilable feud. Since Demon's Heart was moving against Zero Wing, it was only natural that Battle Wolves would interfere. Stepping forward to side with Zero Wing was well within reason. On the other hand, Troubled Times and his Demon's Heart companions were particularly surprised to hear Sirius's declaration. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, after all. As Troubled Times and the others assumed the minor interlude had concluded, another player spoke up from among the crowd. "Greetings, Miss Melancholic. Crimson Emperor is here to negotiate with Zero Wing, as well. That is our only intention. Those who have spoken out against your guild only represent certain powers. They have no bearing on Crimson Emperor's will," illusory words announced as she stepped forward. For a moment, everyone in the lobby fell silent. What's going on? Crimson Emperor stands by Zero Wing's side, too? Not only had Battle Wolves declared its intentions to ally with Zero Wing, but Crimson Emperor had, as well. Everyone's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. Has Crimson Emperor gone mad? Troubled Times stared at illusory words and her entourage in confusion. While he could understand Battle Wolves' decision, he couldn't even fathom what drove Crimson Emperor. Crimson Emperor was neither a friend of Zero Wing's nor Demon's Heart's enemy, yet it was showing strong support for the former. The situation was baffling. Of course, while the two guilds allying themselves with Zero Wing was unexpected, it wouldn't affect the overall situation. Before anyone could overcome their surprise, however, several more players spoke up from among the cloaked group. Shadowless Empire also wishes to form a partnership. We have only come here with this group due to old Yuan's invitation. Young lady from Zero Wing, please, do not misinterpret our intentions, the crimson-eyed elder from Shadowless Empire declared, stepping away from the group. You really are a sleaze, old Lu. You make it sound as if Demon Palace has some other reason for being here, Evil Chelene said, similarly removing himself from the group as he rolled his eyes at the crimson-eyed elder. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After the representatives from Shadowless Empire and Demon Palace declared their desire for peace, the other representatives, aside from those from Demon's Heart and Starlink, did the same, insisting to Melancholic Smile that they were only there to seek an alliance with her guild, nothing else. The various major powers members and independent players in the Freedom Hotel's lobby were dumbfounded as they watched the scene play out. What's going on? What has Zero Wing done? Even Yuan Taishan and Troubled Times watched with their jaws hanging open. They had no idea what was happening, either. Chapter 2572, Stone Forest City Shaken, Darkness Disappears. Chapter 2572, Stone Forest City Shaken, Darkness Disappears. The situation even confused Melancholic Smile, to say nothing of Yuan Taishan and Troubled Times. Only a moment ago, these superpowers representatives had been silent, but based on their imposing auras, they had harbored no intentions of allying with Zero Wing. They now displayed a completely different attitude. Before Troubled Times could say anything to these representatives, a hand shot out and stopped him. His mouth clicked shut as he glanced at Flaming Light in confusion. "We're leaving." Flaming Light snapped after one last glance at Melancholic Smile. He turned and left the Freedom Hotel without another word. He made no attempts to win back the various superpowers. "Are we just going to let Zero Wing off the hook, Vice Guild Leader?" Troubled Times whispered to Flaming Light. They had gone to great lengths to gather so many superpowers. Combined with the Dark World's forces, Stone Forest City, even at intermediate rank, was a fish on the cutting board. Most of the superpowers they had gathered may have abandoned the plan to attack Stone Forest City, but they could still cause enough trouble to cost Zero Wing a fortune and accelerate the city's downfall with Starlink, Demon's Heart, and the adventurer team's mythology controlled, even if they couldn't deal a severe blow. "Fool. Do you think those superpowers would suddenly change their minds without a reason?" Flaming Light growled as he glared at Troubled Times. "Have they unearthed some sort of unexpected information?" Troubled Times wondered, realization dawning on him. Those superpowers are all sly foxes. No ordinary news could make them change sides so drastically. "Something big must have happened with the Dark World," Flaming Light hissed. "Something's happened to the Dark World? How is that possible?" Troubled Times could not help his skepticism. The Dark World was home to powerful lunatics, where the strong preyed upon the weak. If the Dark World's players wanted to enter Cold Spring Forest, there was no power strong enough to stop them, not even Flaming Light, who was responsible for opening the teleportation gate. "I'm not sure yet. I could be overthinking things," Flaming Light said, shaking his head. In reality, he found the deduction hard to believe. "We need to send someone to investigate immediately." "I'll contact Elder Heart right away," Troubled Times said, nodding. Even after Flaming Light and his entourage left the Freedom Hotel, the lobby was still silent as the various Major Powers members and independent players remained speechless. Everything had changed too suddenly. A second ago, the various superpowers had been ready to draw their weapons and declare war on Zero Wing, but in the next moment, they voiced their intentions to ally with the guild. The crowd even wondered if those cloaked players were truly upper echelons from the various superpowers or not. "What's going on here, Old Yuan? Why are these superpowers behaving like this?" Scorching Shine asked, unable to hold back his curiosity any longer. At this moment, Yuan Taishin was just as confused. He, too, wished to know what had just changed. Yuan Taishin struggled to find an answer for Scorched Shine's question when he noticed that he had received a message from Purple Jade some time ago. Could Zero Wing have done something? Realization dawned on Yuan Taishin when he saw the message. When he had heard that Zero Wing had rashly sent a force to the Dark World's teleportation gate, he had sent Purple Jade to investigate the situation. Since she had messaged him, he found it likely that Zero Wing had done something at the gate, which had, in turn, caused this unexpected development. The other superpowers representatives must also have received news, which had changed their minds. Even if Zero Wing has done something, this outcome shouldn't be possible. Yuan Taishin felt that something was amiss, and he immediately opened Purple Jade's message. By the time he finished reading her report, he was astounded. "Old Yuan, what's happened? Did you get disconnected?" Scorching Shine asked when he saw his old comrade's slack expression. Not even Scorching Shine's question shook Yuan Taishin from his daze. He only opened his mouth after some time and stuttered, "They won. Zero Wing actually won. Zero Wing won? What did it win?" Scorching Shine prodded. "Zero Wing won the Dark World." After taking in a deep breath, Yuan Taishin clearly explained, "Zero Wing just won the Dark World at the teleportation gate." "Won the Dark World?" Yuan Taishin's abnormal behavior baffled Scorching Shine. The man was, after all, utterly incoherent. Did he have Alzheimer's? For a moment, Scorching Shine thought it might be time to suggest to his guild leader that Yuan Taishin take a vacation. "Brother Shine, I apologize. I got too excited." Yuan Taishin apologized when he realized that Scorching Shine was looking at him like a mental patient. Chuckling, he explained, a few minutes ago, Zero Wing led a legion of Tier 3 NPCs and repelled the Dark World's invading army. Dawn Dominance, World Domination's guild leader and the Dark World's representative, has publicly announced their retreat. Zero Wing has taken full control of the Dark World's teleportation gate. Zero Wing has defeated the Dark World's invading army. Are you toying with me, old Yuan? Scorching Shine questioned, giving Yuan Taishin a disdainful look. Since Yuan Taishin hadn't controlled his voice, everyone in the lobby had heard him clearly. A commotion erupted, and the various major powers experts and independent players stated at Yuan Taishin as if he were a blubbering fool. No individual power in God's domain was capable of standing against the Dark World's invading army. Although Zero Wing had a large number of Tier 3 NPCs under its command, that only amounted to 600. Trying to stop more than 30,000 Tier 3 players with a measly 600 Tier 3 NPCs was a joke. Even if they included every Tier 3 player in Zero Wing, the guild should have no hope of stopping the Dark World's invading army. Furthermore, the various powers that called the Dark World home had extraordinary powers. If they all revealed just one of their many trump cards, they could easily annihilate every player in Cold Spring Forest 10 times over. With such strength, how could Zero Wing possibly defeat this invading army? I knew you wouldn't believe me. Here, take a look. This is the battle video Jade recorded, Yuan Taishin said, shaking his head helplessly. Yuan Taishin found the situation just as unbelievable, but with the facts before him, he had no choice but to recognize it as truth. Scorching Shine then watched the video Yuan Taishin sent him. Silence. Shock. This. How is this possible? Scorching Shine couldn't believe his eyes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. They were talking about several million expert players. He also saw several dozen Tier 4 summoned creatures and several thousand Tier 3 personal guard. Yet, even with such power, the Dark World's invading army had suffered defeat. Shortly after the video ended, a group of players entered the Freedom Hotel's lobby in a hurry, clearly excited. Big news, everyone. Great news. Zero Wings just repelled the Dark World's invading army and has taken control of the Dark World's teleportation gate. Chapter 2573, Popular Stone Forest City. Chapter 2573, Popular Stone Forest City. When the group that had just burst into the Freedom Hotel excitedly announced Zero Wing's victory of the Dark World's invading army, the players in the lobby, who had been skeptical about Yuan Taishin's stunned announcement, were flabbergasted. What? It's actually true. How could Zero Wing have possibly won? We're talking about an entire world of experts. The fact that the secret pavilion held some of Stone Forest City's shares was no longer a secret. Thus, there had been a chance that Yuan Taishin had been lying to boost Zero Wing's reputation. The players that had just arrived, however, were a different story. Every member of the group was an independent player, and a few of them were well known among the adventurer teams unrelated to Zero Wing in the city. Because of this, they were considered quite credible. Most importantly, they had just explained the sudden change in the various superpowers' attitudes regarding Zero Wing. Even with many players still doubting the news, assuming it was either a lie or outrageously exaggerated, there was no doubt that the guild in question had done something to change the superpowers' minds. That fact alone was enough to shock everyone in the lobby only moments before they were overcome with joy. Without the various superpowers' interference and with Stone Forest City's defenses and terrain advantage, even the Dark World's players would need a long time before they could capture the city. Meanwhile, resident players like themselves could safely and far faster than those based outside of Stone Forest City. Thankfully, we weren't too rash, but I really doubt that Zero Wing's foundations are this formidable. Demon's Heart's flaming light must be going mad with regret right about now, the fierce man from Crimson Emperor said with a bitter smile. The main reason that the various superpowers were so afraid of Demon's Heart was the key in Flaming Light's possession, which allowed him to open the Dark World's teleportation gate in any location he desired. If not for this trump card, Demon's Heart wouldn't have developed so smoothly in the Ten Saints Empire. Flaming Light had intended to use this trump card to salvage Demon's Heart's reputation and deter the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers, but now, both his threat and plans had gone to the dogs. In fact, Flaming Light's trump card had unexpectedly benefited Zero Wing, increasing both the guild's fame and fortune. It was only a matter of time before word of the Dark World's defeat spread across the main continent, and as it did, everyone would learn about Zero Wing. Not even the various superpowers were capable of accomplishing such a feat, yet Zero Wing had succeeded. Although the guild had relied on a large number of Tier 3 NPCs to do so, those NPCs were considered a part of Zero Wing's strength. In addition, with the Dark World's teleportation gate under Zero Wing's control, even ordinary players knew this victory would usher in an era of power for the guild. No one would be surprised if it instantly became a superpower in its own right. And the one who granted Zero Wing this opportunity was none other than Demon's Heart's Flaming Light. That's right. Without the Dark World's assistance, Demon's Heart will have a very hard time expanding in the Ten Saints Empire. Illusory Words agreed, nodding. Demon's Heart had gone out for wool and come home shorn. The Dark World's teleportation gate should have triggered unprecedented change on the main continent. However, Zero Wing now controlled the gate, and the guild had made it clear that it intended to collect a fee from every player that wanted to use the teleportation gate. This would significantly decrease the number of visiting Dark World players and, in turn, reduce the number of Demon's Heart's potential allies. Unless the Dark Guild wanted to face the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers, it would have to keep a low profile for a considerable amount of time. You've done a great job this time, Illusory. Since the Grand Elders had nearly made such a catastrophic mistake, the guild leader has reclaimed a lot of authority in the guild. The guild leader sent a message ago requesting that you represent Crimson Emperor in the negotiations with Zero Wing. It would also be best if you could rent a few of the Freedom Hotel's rooms long-term. Don't worry about the required money and materials, the fierce man congratulated his comrade. The guild leader's requests are certainly troublesome. Now that Zero Wing has defeated the Dark World, a ton of powers will try to rent a large number of the hotel rooms, Illusory Words grumbled, offering a half-hearted smile. With Cold Spring Forest now free of the Dark World's threat, Stone Forest City was, once again, a sacred leveling ground. It would soon become a holy city for the Eastern Continent's various powers and independent players, and when it did, even entering the city would become a challenge, let alone renting one of the Freedom Hotel's rooms. Shortly after the various superpowers meeting in the first-floor lobby had concluded, news of the Dark World's defeat spread throughout the continent. As they learned of the event, many powers began to regret their decision to abandon Stone Forest City the moment things had turned south. Crap. How is this even possible? Zero Wing is so awesome. Even an entire other world of players is helpless against that guild. Who could possibly stand against it? Stone Forest City? It seems like a good place to develop. When the various kingdoms and empires' powers and independent experts learned about Zero Wing's victory, many of them considered moving their bases of operations to Stone Forest City. Aside from the fact that Stone Forest City occupied a level 100 neutral map, the fact that the Dark World's invading army hadn't been able to shake Zero Wing's foundations made the city incredibly valuable. None of the city's residents would have to worry about suddenly losing their bases or another power taking over, which would render all of their investments useless. This concern was precisely the reason that many players developed in NPC cities, rather than in guild cities. Now that Zero Wing had affirmed its strength, Stone Forest City's stability wasn't a concern. At the very least, it would be a long while before any power could bring harm to the city. This time period would be more than enough for players to earn back what they had invested in the city. For a time, players from various kingdoms and empires swarmed toward Stone Forest City. The abrupt population boom was easily 10 times larger than the initial wave of players that visited the city once it had reached intermediate rank. Moreover, an astounding number of players had begun to apply to the guild. Zero Wing had already received more than 2 million applicants among its various branches, with many of these experts capable of reaching the Trial Tower's 5th floor and beyond. Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, and Zero Wing's other management personnel were stupefied. No matter how well they had managed Zero Wing in the past, few new experts had applied to join, yet after a single battle, everything had changed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Guild Leader, Stone Forest City's player population has exceeded 8 million, and I believe even more players are on their way. Should we slightly raise the city's entrance fee? Aqua Rose asked, still blissful after reading the latest statistics report. Their war with the Dark World had ended less than half a day ago, yet Stone Forest City's player population had risen from less than 2 million to over 8 million. The number of players visiting the city had completely exceeded her expectations. No, let's forget about increasing the entrance fee. We still need a large number of independent players to settle down in Stone Forest City. However, we can increase the Freedom Hotel's prices. Don't normal rooms cost 30 silver per day? Raise it to 1 gold. Bronze members will get a 10% discount, silver members will get 20%, and gold members will get 30%, Shifeng decided, chuckling. Nothing in this world came for free. Since the various powers wanted their experts to develop as quickly as possible, he wouldn't be courteous. He was incredibly poor right now, after all. To arm his night division, he had spent almost all of the money he had. I understand. The pricing astonished Aqua Rose a little. Not even ordinary experts could afford a daily expense of 1 gold. Ah, right. Guild leader, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society have contacted me and wish to discuss the offer you made them. They're asking when you'll be free to speak on the matter. Chapter 2574, Ancient God's Tower. Chapter 2574, Ancient God's Tower. Stone Forest City, Freedom Hotel's top-floor reception room. Blue Rainbow from Dark Rhapsody and Elder Gold from Deity Society sat on a sofa, an awkward silence between them, in a spacious, luxurious reception room. Magic Flash and Old Forest sat beside them, just as dazed. This was simply too humiliating. They had thought that their previous meeting with Shifeng would have been their last, and they would never have to see each other again. They had seen Shifeng's hope of a stronger partnership between their guilds as nothing more than wishful thinking. However, less than 2 days after that meeting, they had sought the swordsman out again. Meanwhile, Shifeng had transformed his brazen declaration into reality, taking control of the Dark World's teleportation gate and the Otherworld's lifeline. If any of the Dark World's powers or players wanted to continue and accelerate their development, they'd have to travel to Cold Spring Forest. However, Zero Wing's teleportation fees were just fraudulent. The guild actually charged 1 darkness crystal or similarly attributed magic crystal per person. Attributed magic crystals were even rarer than ordinary magic crystals, and dark players needed darkness crystals for their growth. In fact, they needed a lot of them. There weren't even enough darkness crystals to go around for the Dark World's various powers and independent players, yet Zero Wing was cruel enough to charge darkness crystals as its teleportation fee. Worse yet, they couldn't defeat Zero Wing. To secure its hold on the teleportation gate, Zero Wing had established a permanent magic barrier around it, in addition to stationing 2 Crimson Dragon flying ships, 8 combat puppets, 600 Tier 3 knights, and 2,000 Tier 2 knights to guard the gate. The defenses Zero Wing had set up around the teleportation gate were maddening. Sending an army of 20,000 Tier 3 experts would be futile against such high security, much less sneaking through. The only option the Dark World's powers and players had left was to hand over the required fee obediently. After Blue Rainbow and the others waited for a while, the reception room's doors opened abruptly, and Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame, walked in. He was the monster that had single-handedly deterred the Dark World's army of several million players. However, Shifeng seemed like a completely different person at the moment. When he had stood before the Dark World's teleportation gate, he had radiated an incredible aura that frightened everyone in his presence, but now, they couldn't even detect the hint of an aura as if he were just an ordinary player. Similar to Blue Rainbow and the others' first meeting with this swordsman, he seemed harmless. Rather than contempt, however, they only looked at Shifeng with fear in their eyes. They hadn't paid much attention to him during their last meeting, but now that they did, they couldn't even consider Shifeng as human. He felt more like a plant, nearly non-existent. As Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold began to stand to greet him, Shifeng gestured for them to remain seated, dispensing with the formalities. He then smiled and asked, "I've heard that you've conveyed my proposal to your respective guild leaders. How do your guilds wish to cooperate with Zero Wing?" Magic Flash and Old Forest inwardly rolled their eyes at Shifeng's question. His actions had practically engraved his words on their guild leader's bones, and they'd remember them for the rest of their lives. Guild leader Blackflame, your proposal has delighted our guild leaders, and they have stated that as long as Zero Wing will waive the teleportation fees for our guild members, we will help the Candlelight trading firm establish itself in the Dark World's major NPC cities. What do you think? Blue Rainbow asked. Although their two guilds were reluctant to accept Shifeng's conditions, they had no choice with the situation weighing against them. If they declined, both of their guilds' positions would become more disadvantageous as time passed. Waive the teleportation fee? After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng said, that's fine, but I'd like to set up a branch shop in every NPC city in the Dark World. Of course, Zero Wing will cover the necessary expenditures. Your two guilds only need to resolve the issue of land. Guild leader Black Flame, you are asking for the impossible. The Dark World is even larger than the main continent's ancient empires. While our guilds are two of the top 3 in the Dark World, we only control a small portion of the other world. We simply don't have the manpower and resources to ensure that Candlelight can operate in every NPC city, Elder Gold said, shaking his head with an unhappy smile. Dark Rhapsody, Deity Society, and world domination had a lot of influence on the surface, but the same couldn't be said for their control on the Dark World. In the Dark World, players had partial control of the various NPC cities. As long as a power controlled one of these cities, they wouldn't have to worry about needing funds or resources, and without these concerns, they didn't have to worry about offending the otherworld's top 3 guilds. To put it simply, helping Candlelight secure branches in the Dark World's major NPC cities was a colossal challenge. Both guilds would have to pull a lot of strings to fulfill their end of the bargain. Unfortunately, helping the trading firm set up shops in every NPC city would be a dream. Even if world domination cooperated, the feat wouldn't be feasible. There is something else we need to inform you about, Guild leader Black Flame, Blue Rainbow said. Due to your actions at the teleportation gate, the Dark World's various major powers loathe Zero Wing. As a result, our guilds are risking much by allying with your guild. Moreover, Demon's Heart has traveled across the Dark World, secretly persuading the various powers to join its alliance. By the looks of it, they plan to challenge the Ancient God's Tower in the Dark World. This Ancient God's Tower is extraordinary, surviving since the Dark World's creation. There are rumors that it's connected to thousands of other worlds. Nobody had been able to clear the tower's trials yet, but as players grow stronger, the various powers will be able to activate a portion of it, if not all. If that happens, the various powers will reach the main continent, even without the teleportation gate. Only, they will have to do so by passing through another otherworld. Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow, who stood behind Shifeng, frowned at the news. If what the female Dark Knight said was true, wouldn't that mean the effort they had put into capturing the teleportation gate would go to waste? The Ancient God's Tower? Shifeng had some recollection of this name. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Ancient God's Tower was connected to thousands of other worlds. It was also one of the reasons that the Dark World was considered a special otherworld in God's domain. However, since no power had taken control of the Dark World's teleportation gate in his past, none of the Dark World's powers had bothered to challenge the tower's trials. Activating the Ancient God's Tower was insanely difficult, after all. Of course, while current players had no hope of fully activating the Ancient God's Tower, activating some of it should be possible. That's right. The Dark World's various powers have already turned their focus to the Ancient God's Tower, and Demon's Heart has quite a bit of resources and information relating to it. I'm afraid it won't be long before the various powers band together to challenge the tower, Blue Rainbow said, nodding. 1 darkness crystal per person was no trivial cost. No one would pay such a high fee unless necessary. What if I can help you secure the Ancient God's Tower within a short time? Shifeng asked. Chapter 2575, Crazy Choice. Chapter 2575, Crazy Choice. You'll help us secure the Ancient God's Tower? Shifeng's question stunned Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold. MHM. As long as you secure the Ancient God's Tower before anyone else, You'll have full control of the tower's teleportation array for a certain time, correct? Shifeng said. The ancient god's tower had a total of 7 floors, and each housed several teleportation arrays to different otherworlds. Some were even connected to resource-rich secret lands. The first player to conquer any of the floor's trials would become the floor's first floor master. Once a month, players could contest for the title. If Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society could conquer the ancient god's tower's first floor, they would have full control of that floor for the next month, and no one could leave the dark world through the teleportation arrays during that time. Guild leader Blackflame, you might not be aware, but the ancient god's tower isn't like the dark world's teleportation gate. Aside from the intense suppression non-dark players like yourself face in the dark world, players are prohibited from using tools within the tower. NPCs cannot enter the tower, either. Players will have to rely on their own strength and skills to clear the trials, Elder Gold said. He didn't doubt Zero Wing's strength, but the ancient god's tower was in the dark world, where non-dark players wouldn't be able to exhibit their full strength. Including the ban on tools and NPCs, Zero Wing wouldn't accomplish anything in the tower. If it were so easy, Demon's Heart wouldn't have bothered to gather the dark world's various powers in an attempt to conquer the tower and would have sought the help of the main continent's superpowers instead. The various superpowers certainly had the strength to trample the dark world's various powers, normally. That's right. Not only do the ancient god's tower's trials have a strict time limit, but we'll also need a minimum of 200 Tier 3 experts to clear them. Without enough players, we won't be able to handle the hordes of monsters within, not to mention capture the tower cities. While our guilds can barely gather 200 Tier 3 experts, the first floor's trial is just as difficult as a level 100, super large-scale team dungeon. Our experts simply don't meet the weapon, equipment, skill, and spell requirements, Blue Rainbow insisted, nodding. Their 2 guilds had considered raiding the ancient god's tower, but the feat was too difficult. No individual power in the dark world could even clear the first floor's trial. Unfortunately, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society no longer had the option of allying with other powers. After the dark world's invading army had been defeated, Demon's Heart had exposed their guild's alliance with Zero Wing, instantly isolating them from the rest of the dark world. As a result, both guilds were forced into deepening their relationship with Zero Wing. If they didn't, their guilds would be doomed once Demon's Heart and the dark world's other powers conquered the ancient god's tower's first floor. Relax. That won't be a problem, Shifeng said, chuckling. However, I have an extra condition if we succeed. Shifeng knew far more about the ancient god's tower than any player in God's domain, and as such, he knew that the 2 guilds had no chance of success, even if they worked together. That was only true for the current Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society, however. Are you really that confident in our success, Guild Leader Blackflame? Blue Rainbow asked. She knew that Zero Wing had extraordinary Tier 3 experts, but the suppression regular players faced in the dark world was nothing to ignore. Even ordinary domain realm experts would, at best, exhibit void realm combat standards. This was why the main continent's various superpowers had allied with the dark world's powers, rather than invade the other world. While I can't guarantee our success, I'm 70% to 80% confident, Shifeng replied. 80%. Elder Gold stuttered, his eyes going wide. If Shifeng hadn't personally captured the dark world's teleportation gate, he would have assumed the swordsman was an escaped lunatic from a mental asylum. Even without the dark world's suppression, the various superpowers wouldn't be guaranteed to conquer the ancient god's tower's first floor. Even with its heaven-defying foundations, Zero Wing should, at best, have a 40% success rate. 70 or 80% was practically ensured victory. May I know of your conditions, Guild Leader Blackflame? Blue Rainbow asked after calming down. Although she didn't know whether or not Shifeng was telling the truth, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society would only benefit if his plan succeeded. They had no reason to refuse. It's quite simple. I want 80% of the ancient god's tower's profits. I also want the authority to manage your guild's main force members. In addition, my command will take precedence over your guild leaders during times of impending danger, Shifeng said after giving the matter some thought. This, Elder Gold could not help but hesitate. If Zero Wing helped them gain control over the ancient god's tower, their guilds wouldn't mind splitting the profits. They could even accept only 20%, but giving up control of their main force members was absurd. Rest assured, I won't interfere with your main force's daily activities. They just need to follow orders when I need them, Shifeng said. Of course, you can return and take the time to consider my proposal. I don't need an answer right away. We have no need to consider the offer, Guild Leader Black Flame, Dark Rhapsody agrees. In return, Zero Wing must allow our members to travel through the teleportation gate freely. Of course, Dark Rhapsody will do its best to assist in establishing the candlelight trading firm in the Dark World, Blue Rainbow abruptly interjected. Rainbow, are you insane? You're talking about the management rights for your guild's main force, Elder Gold asked as he stared at the female Dark Knight in shock. Agreeing to this condition was on par with handing Shifeng control of a fraction of Dark Rhapsody's backbone. Claiming that Shifeng would act as a partial guild leader was no exaggeration. I'm still sane. My guild leader impressed upon me the importance of cooperating with Zero Wing. Moreover, I don't think that guild leader Black Flame actually fancies our two guilds' main forces, Blue Rainbow informed Elder Gold via a whisper. Realization immediately dawned on the older man. Zero Wing no longer lacked manpower. With every moment, a ton of experts applied to join the guild, and Zero Wing now controlled the Dark World's teleportation gate. Until someone activated the ancient god's tower, Zero Wing had a firm grasp on the Dark World's lifeline. In truth, even Shifeng was a little surprised. He hadn't expected Blue Rainbow to agree so decisively. Any other large guild's upper echelon would have likely turned and left in a huff. Deal. Deity Society will agree to your conditions, as well, Guild Leader Black Flame. However, Deity Society wants the same conditions as Dark Rhapsody in return, Elder Gold said, sighing. Now that the Dark World's various powers recognized their guilds as Zero Wing's allies, they had no choice but to stick by Zero Wing until the very end. Moreover, an alliance with this guild would ensure that both Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society could develop far faster than their dark counterparts. That won't be a problem. Once we sign the contract, your guild's members may use the teleportation gate to their heart's content, Shifeng agreed, nodding. What do we do once the contract has been signed? Elder Gold asked. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Demon's Heart was already in a rush to find allies to conquer the ancient god's tower. Once its team had enough Tier 3 experts, it would challenge the tower's trials. Hence, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society were running out of time. Simple. Send your main force members to Stone Forest City immediately. Zero Wing will take responsibility for their growth, Shifeng said, chuckling. Everything in God's domain boiled down to players' strength, including raiding team dungeons and the ancient god's tower. As long as he could help the two guilds' main force members grow strong enough, raiding the tower wouldn't be an issue. Their growth. Shifeng's demand stunned Blue Rainbow. She had never thought he'd choose such an option. Where are we going? To the level 120 secret land, Poison City, Shifeng declared. Chapter 2576, Secret Land Exploration? Chapter 2576, Secret Land Exploration? When Shifeng stated his intentions to travel to a level 120 secret land, both Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were speechless. The various superpowers hadn't even entered level 110,100 man-team dungeons once. In fact, barely any players had reached level 110 yet. While secret lands weren't dungeons, they were even more dangerous. Even the safest secret land could rival super large-scale, hard-mode team dungeons of the same level. Not even superpowers would dare suggest exploring a level 120 secret land. Yet, Shifeng spoke of doing so as casually as if he were visiting the local market. For a moment, Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold doubted that they played the same game Shifeng did. What? Is there a problem? Shifeng curiously asked when he saw the two representatives' dazed expressions. No, it's nothing. Only, Guild Leader Black Flame, we're talking about a level 120 secret land. I'm afraid that with our current levels and equipment, Elder Gold said worriedly. Entering a level 120 secret land wouldn't be a problem, even a level 1 player could do it. The problem was whether or not they could leave the secret land alive. Unlike dungeons, secret lands' difficulty and number of monsters weren't fixed, but randomized. If one were lucky, a 100-man team would be enough to survive. If not, they might need a team of 1,000 players, or even 5,000, to make it out. This was why raiding secret lands proved much harder than raiding a team dungeon of the same level. Normally, guilds would mobilize a large fraction of their members to raid a secret land, but after level 100, only Tier 3 experts had any chance of surviving. Tier 2 experts would only hold them back. In other words, guilds couldn't use all of their available manpower to raid level 100 plus secret lands, they'd have to rely on a small number of Tier 3 experts. This was precisely why the various major powers and superpowers hadn't bothered to raid level 100 plus secret lands, even after crossing the level 100 threshold. Relax. As long as everyone follows my orders, we shouldn't have any major problems, Shifeng said. Chukto during his previous life, Poison City had been famous for how incredibly dangerous it was. Even when the various superpowers had dispatched a team of several thousand Tier 3 experts, they had failed to complete the raid. The various superpowers had only conquered the secret land after their experts had reached Tier 4. However, Shifeng had no intention of capturing Poison City. He only wanted the fragment of Solomon's sword that hid within. Moreover, he now had the fragmented legendary ranked Abyssal Blade and Ring of Gospel. The ring would be particularly helpful on this endeavor. Once he had become an intermediate master magician, he found he could amplify the Ring of Gospel's effects until it was even effective against Tier 4 monsters, which drastically increased his chances of obtaining the sword fragment. Now, he only lacked numbers. Generally, one would need at least 1,000 Tier 3 experts to raid level 100 plus secret lands, but even with the Hell Legion's 300 Tier 3 experts, he only had around 500 under his command. It was too risky to take such a small team into the secret land. However, if he included Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's 200 plus Tier 3 experts, he'd have a much higher chance of securing Solomon's sword's fragment. Something still felt off to Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold, but since they had already signed a contract with Shifeng, they couldn't go back on their word for no good reason. The two representatives then contacted their guilds, secretly gathering their Tier 3 experts. Meanwhile, Shifeng gathered Zero Wings experts and the Hell Legion. In the Dark World, news of the alliance between Zero Wing, Dark Rhapsody, and Deity Society spread quickly. A commotion rose all across the other world, and when the Dark World's many independent players learned that the two Dark Guilds members could use the teleportation gate for free, many of them began to apply. Elder Heart, World Domination followed Demon's Heart's instructions to spearhead the attack against Zero Wing, and yet, the guild's reputation is in tatters, and it has become the Dark World's shame. To make matters worse, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society have become incredibly popular after allying with Zero Wing. If you still can't offer anything substantial, we'll have to consider doing the same, Dawn Dominance coldly informed Furious Heart, who sat across from him in the reception room. Please, rest assured, Guild Leader Dawn. We are responsible for inviting world domination into this situation, and we won't let your guild suffer for it. Don't you want to take revenge against Zero Wing, Guild Leader Dawn? Furious Heart asked. Not only does Zero Wing possess the popular Stone Forest City, but it has also taken control of the Dark World's teleportation gate. It stands in the limelight on the eastern continent, but the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. Many superpowers currently find Zero Wing's popularity to be irksome. I want something practical, not empty promises, Dawn Dominance growled, rolling his eyes. He understood Furious Heart's logic, but the problem was that no one could do anything to Zero Wing right now. However, the problem was that nobody was capable of doing anything against Zero Wing right now. We have quietly received funding from quite a few superpowers. We've also secured a loan of weapons and equipment. If World Domination is willing to join our alliance, we'll lend you 50 sets of level 105 fine gold equipment and 10 sets of dark gold equipment for 10 days without cost, Furious Heart calmly stated, smiling. How about it? Even ordinary superpowers have a hard time acquiring such equipment, but world domination can borrow it by joining our alliance. With these sets, your guild can raid level 100 team dungeons, obtaining even more top-tier weapons and equipment. In addition, once we've captured the Ancient God's Tower, world domination will receive 5% of the tower's shares. It's a much better offer than what Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society accepted from Zero Wing, don't you think? 50 sets of level 105 fine gold equipment and 10 sets of level 105 dark gold equipment. The terms of Furious Heart's deal astonished Dawn Dominance. You can get your hands on so much top-tier equipment. Although he knew that the outcome of the war had enraged Demon's Heart and the outside world superpowers, he had never dreamed they would go to such lengths to deal with Zero Wing. With that much top-tier equipment, he could arm an incredibly powerful 100-man team. Even raiding level 100, super large-scale team dungeons and level 110 mythic field bosses would be possible, not to mention level 100,000 100-man team dungeons. What had their goal been in heading to Cold Spring Forest? To obtain better weapons and equipment, as well as rapidly rising through the levels? If they had enough top-tier weapons and equipment, would leveling and securing more still be a problem? Don't concern yourself with that, Guild Leader Dawn. Just sign the contract, and we'll hand the equipment over immediately, Furious Heart urged, chuckling. Deal. I'll agree to your offer, Dawn Dominance declared. Very well. I'll contact my vice guild leader immediately. You'll have the weapons and equipment promised within half a day, Furious Heart said, not surprised in the least by Dawn Dominance's reaction. Only a fool would refuse such an offer. After signing the contract, Furious Heart left World Domination's residence and returned to Demon City. Is everything settled? Flaming Light raised his head and asked as Furious Heart entered his office. It's done. The Dark World's various powers have agreed to join our alliance. We can raid the Ancient God's Tower at any time, Furious Heart reported. Good. Flaming Light nodded, satisfied. Smiling, he continued, Zero Wing must assume I'm helpless now that it controls the Dark World's teleportation gate. Unfortunately, Zero Wing is unaware that its actions have only earned more loathing and anger. Zero Wing had no background, yet it sat on a mountain of wealth and resources. One could even say that it had monopolized all of the Dark World's resources. Naturally, the various superpowers wouldn't let the guild get away with it. Hence, without lifting a finger, plenty of superpowers and corporations had approached him, declaring their intentions to supply all sorts of resources in exchange for dragging Zero Wing down from its pedestal. As long as Demon's Heart secured the Ancient God's Tower, it would usher in dark times for Zero Wing. If Zero Wing had obediently accepted defeat, it would have only lost Cold Spring Forest, but now, it would lose everything. The guild's night division was limited to Cold Spring Forest, after all. Elsewhere, Shifeng had reached Poison City alongside Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's main force members. The moment the Dark players set foot in the secret land, they shuddered. Black fog covered the land, and they felt as if they were walking on clouds as they stepped into it. They also felt suddenly cold and hungry, and their 5 senses and reaction speeds had weakened. Here, they wouldn't be able to exhibit half of their usual combat power. However, the dark fog wasn't the worst part. They were far more afraid of the level 115+ monsters that roamed the forest outside of Poison City. Even the weakest monster here was a High Lord, and many were Great Lord and Grand Lord ranked wandering souls. These monsters had once been members of the army that guarded Poison City before the black fog had devoured them. The closer they got to these monsters, the more the corrosive energy in the area affected them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Sure enough, there are a lot of monsters here. Shifeng was similarly astonished when he saw the wandering souls nearby. Not only did the secret land house far more monsters than during his previous life, but the death energy that enveloped the area was also denser. Of course, that wasn't enough to deter him from exploring the secret land, and he turned to Cola and the others. Start luring monsters, but not too many at once. 500 or 600 will be enough. Shifeng's command rendered Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members speechless. They were sure they'd be annihilated if they took on 100 monsters at a time, let alone 500. The death energy in this map was simply too powerful, and all of these monsters were level 115 or higher. Trying to fight 500 or 600 simultaneously was suicide. Okay. However, Cola, Fire Dance, and the others remained unfazed. They immediately dashed into the forest on their own and began to attract the wandering souls' aggro. Chapter 2577, Difference of Level 120, Frightening Wealth. Chapter 2577, Difference of Level 120, Frightening Wealth. As Cola, Fire Dance, and the others darted through the silent forest, they caused a commotion. Small groups of wandering souls flew toward the offending players, quickly surrounding them. These monsters were so fast that ordinary experts wouldn't have a chance to escape. However, the encirclement was practically non-existent to Cola and Zero Wing's other MTS. Like unstoppable tanks, they charged through the monsters, shoving aside any that stood in their path with their shields. None of the wandering souls could stop their advance. Meanwhile, Fire Dance and the other more agile players maneuvered their way around the wandering souls, letting none lay a hand on them. The death energy the wandering souls exuded had no effect on Cola, Fire Dance, or their companions. It almost seemed like some kind of invisible barrier protected them from the death energy's corrosion. In no time at all, Cola and the others had pulled around 600 monsters toward the rest of the team. Wandering Soul, Undead, High Lord, Level 115 HP 45 0000045 00000, Elite Wandering Soul, Undead, Great Lord, Level 116 HP 120 000000120 0000000, Crazed Soul, Undead, Grand Lord, Level 116 HP 400 000000400 0000000, facing the 400 plus Wandering Souls, 100 plus Elite Wandering Souls, and 6 Crazed Souls. Everyone on the team couldn't help but shudder. Unlike ordinary monsters, these Wandering Souls had once been Poison City's warriors. Even in death, they retained the skills they had used in life. When several hundred Wandering Souls gathered, they actually formed a battle array, and although it wasn't very strong, it significantly boosted the monster's movement speed and reaction speed. A faint layer of mana had also appeared around the monsters, strengthening their defense and the power of their skills and spells. However, the team was even more surprised to find that these Wandering Souls didn't employ simple pack tactics like ordinary monsters. Rather, they moved in proper formation. The Wandering Souls with shields and melee weapons moved to the front of the group, while those with bows and staves stood in the back. The small force gradually and orderly advanced. So, this is a level 120 secret land? Blue Rainbow was shocked as she watched the monsters march like a uniform army. Although she had known that level 100 plus secret lands were extraordinary, she couldn't help her surprise as she experienced it for herself. These monsters were already a major challenge since their basic attributes were higher than players of the same tier and level. They also had far more HP and defense. Now that they could fight with as much organization as NPCs, their combat power would drastically increase. If their team hadn't had the numerical advantage, they wouldn't have stood a chance. Even Hell Rush frowned at the incoming force. Normally, the Hell Legion's experts wouldn't have any problems fighting these monsters one-on-one. Not even the Grand Lord-ranked Crazed Souls would be too much for the Hell Legion to overcome, but now, these monsters had their own battle array. Not only did this battle array boost the Wandering Souls' physical performance, but it also drastically reduced the number of weak points they had. Including the monster's level advantage, even the Hell Legion was in for a tough battle without the help of weapons and equipment with the Ignore levels attribute. Only Shifeng seemed unaffected by Poison City's formidable monsters. This was the true combat power of God's Domain's monsters. All monsters before level 115 were merely obstacles to help players get used to the game. Once players neared the level 120 threshold, however, God's Domain no longer catered to its players. Instead, players had to adapt to God's Domain. Monsters would begin to behave like living beings, with their own characteristics. If players couldn't take advantage of these characteristics, even experts of the same tier would fall in a one-on-one fight. This was why level 120 secret lands and team dungeons were true treasure troves for tier 3 players, containing all sorts of ancient inheritances, skill, and spell books. As the Undead Legion approached, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's players mentally prepared themselves for a hard fight. Meanwhile, Shifeng retrieved the Ring of Gospel and spent 5,000 magic crystals to activate Miniature World. The Phantom World descended, and the Undead Legion's basic attributes fell rapidly. Their reaction speed and physique also plummeted. The Dark players on the team were stupefied. They had experienced the Ring of Gospel's power before, but they were still as shocked as they had been the first time. A moment ago, their senses had warned them that these undead were powerful opponents, but now, the monsters seemed relatively easy to defeat. They couldn't help but feel grateful that Shifeng stood on their side, not against them. "All right, attack. Let's end this battle quickly," Shifeng commanded when he realized most of his team was still dazed. The Ring of Gospel was indeed an amazing tool, but it was incredibly costly. Just maintaining Miniature World for 10 minutes cost 5,000 magic crystals. Shifeng's command shook everyone from their stupor, and they began to activate skills and spells against the incoming legion. Now that they had the advantage in basic attributes, the quickest and simplest way to victory was to face these wandering souls head-on. Boom! 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 When the first volley of Tier 3 skills and spells landed, the ground and nearby forest shook violently. The bombardment even transformed the terrain around them. After 10 minutes, over 80% of the Undead Legion had fallen, and the few survivors only had scant amounts of HP remaining. Even without Miniature World suppression, the team could rely on their overwhelming numerical advantage to eliminate the remaining monsters. During the fight, everyone on the team was able to experience what it felt like to face a true monster the main god system had designed. The main god system hadn't restrained the wandering souls in the slightest, and they had incredible control of the death energy wafting off them. If players did not learn how to manipulate their own mana to defend themselves, the death energy would quickly corrode and influence their bodies. Normally, this learning process would be incredibly dangerous. If players failed to defend themselves, the corrosion would temporarily paralyze them. An instant death wouldn't be surprising in that case. Fortunately, the team had more than just an overwhelming numerical advantage. The monsters before them were at death's door, and as a result, their combat power had dropped slightly. Hence, they posed far less of a threat. Every player on the team was a Tier 3 expert, with far greater talent and combat standards than ordinary players. Although they had only experienced such combat for a short time, they had all gained a newfound understanding of mana control and their mana bodies. However, the team was far more surprised to see how much EXP they earned from the slain wandering souls. The monsters granted such abundant EXP that even Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were shocked. Every member of the team saw a significant rise in their experience bars after just defeating around 600 wandering souls. Some players even rose from level 107 to 108. Their leveling speed here was at least 10 times faster than in the outside world. Moreover, the monsters had dropped a bunch of loot. Items were scattered across the entire battlefield. These monsters' drop rate was more than double that of monsters in the outside world, particularly when it came to weapons and equipment. Even the weakest piece of equipment was level 115 Mysterious Iron rank, and 6 pieces of level 115 Secret Silver equipment had dropped. For a while, the Dark players had bloodshot eyes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU to them, level 115 Mysterious Iron equipment might be subpar, but level 115 Secret Silver equipment was incredibly precious. So long as they equipped level reduction gemstones, they could arm themselves with level 115 Secret Silver equipment after reaching level 110. Naturally, level 115 Secret Silver equipment was slightly better than level 110 Fine Gold equipment. Due to equipment's low drop rate, the various powers were going mad in their search for level 105 Fine Gold equipment. They could only dream of level 110 Fine Gold items. Now, after fighting for less than 15 minutes, their team had obtained 6 pieces of level 115 Secret Silver equipment. If they grinded here for a full day, their harvest would be astronomical. While Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members envied Zero Wing over so much loot, Fire Dance, who was responsible for collecting the items, excitedly ran up to Shifeng. Guild leader, it dropped. Chapter 2578, Frightening Zero Wing. Chapter 2578, Frightening Zero Wing. As Fire Dance approached with a tattered, old tome, Shifeng's eyes widened in surprise. What? It dropped, just like that. The monsters wandering around Poison City had a chance of dropping 2 support items when killed, and both were worth thousands of gold. However, no one would willingly part with either support item, even when offered a level 100+ epic item. One of the 2 items was an ancient potion, while the other was a mana battle array. The ancient potion in question could accelerate the process of unlocking players' mana bodies, while permanently improving their mana control. With this potion, even ordinary Tier 3 players could unlock their mana body's full potential within 2 months. On the other hand, the mana battle array was even more astounding. Normally, battle arrays had to be engraved into players' equipment, meaning that once players replaced their battle array equipment, they'd lose the battle array. However, players could directly learn the mana battle array found in Poison City. Hence, they wouldn't have to worry about losing the array when they switched to new equipment. Players could use it forever. The mana battle array required a minimum of 12 players to activate. Once active, not only would it increase the mana density around players, but players' basic attributes would rise, as well. Most importantly, the battle array would form a layer of mana armor around players, increasing their magic resistance and resistance to foreign energies' corrosion. The tome in Fire Dance's hand was none other than the mana battle array. It was no wonder she was so ecstatic. As the mana battle array was akin to a skill, it could be used where tools were prohibited, such as many of God's Domain's level 100+ maps and team dungeons. In these locations, the mana battle array was practically invaluable. In the past, the various powers would spend more than 2 weeks grinding near Poison City without obtaining a single mana battle array, and yet, one had just dropped from a single wave of wandering souls. The current drop rate was astounding. When Hell Rush and the others saw the mana battle array's information, they couldn't help but feel a little jealous. With a complete set, one could increase a team's overall strength to a whole new level. The mana battle array would be especially helpful when teams explored certain maps or dungeons and didn't meet the equipment requirements. That tome was even more valuable than level 115 top-tier weapons and equipment. Now that they knew the Wandering Souls could drop something as awesome as the mana battle array, Zero Wings members were overcome with fighting spirit. Cola and the others immediately split away from the main team to lure more Wandering Souls. Moreover, they now knew that the team could easily handle 600 Wandering Souls with the Ring of Gospel's assistance, and so they decided to gather even more monsters to maximize the ring's effects. After a short moment, Cola and his comrades ran toward the team with nearly 800 Wandering Souls trailing behind them. Seeing this, the team's members sharpened their focus and prepared for battle. Over the next 3 days, the team restlessly grinded on the Wandering Souls roaming the forest around Poison City. After 3 days, every member of the team had gained 5 levels. Fire Dance, Cola, and the other Zero Wing members had reached level 114, while Shifeng had reached level 115. Meanwhile, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members had reached level 112 and 113. Their levels would even shock the various superpowers. The dark players on the team wished they could stay in Poison City forever. Leveling 5 times in 3 days was unheard of, especially at their levels. Normally, they'd be lucky to level up once every 5 days. No one would believe them if they told them. Meanwhile, Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold finally understood why Shifeng was so confident about helping them conquer the ancient god's tower. This leveling speed was simply maddening. Furthermore, fighting these monsters had helped them rapidly improve their combat standards. What Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society's members didn't know was that Shifeng had spent an astronomical number of magic crystals to make this 3-day grind possible. He had arrived with 600,000 magic crystals in his bag, but now, he had less than 50,000 remaining. Moreover, he had used Miniature World sparingly. Otherwise, he would have blown through all 600,000 crystals by now. Of course, the bounty he received in return was amazing. During the past 3 days, he had obtained over 700 pieces of level 115 secret silver equipment and over 5,000 pieces of level 115 mysterious iron equipment. He could easily earn back the cost of this grind by selling the mysterious iron equipment. He had also acquired a total of 87 level 115 fine gold weapons and equipment. Of course, Shifeng had no intention of selling any of the weapons or equipment that had dropped. Rather, he'd make them available to his guildmates. After embedding a level reduction gemstone into every weapon and equipment piece, he distributed them among Blue Frost and Zero Wing's other members from Shelter 1, providing a massive boost to their basic attributes. Now, their attributes were even higher than the Hell Legion's experts. Even in Netherworld Empire, the Hell Legion's members were experts among experts. Every one of them wore level 105 fine gold equipment, with some wearing dark gold ranked items. Their equipment standards even ranked at the top compared to the various superpowers experts, yet it was 2 whole ranks weaker than the items Blue Frost and his team wore. Of course, Shifeng did not mistreat the Hell Legion, granting the Legion members a portion of the level 115 secret silver equipment. After all, he had a contract with Netherworld Empire, which required him to keep the Hell Legion's equipment up to date. Furthermore, the Hell Legion's members had incredible combat standards. Better equipment would only help them exhibit even more combat power. Aside from weapons and equipment, Shifeng had obtained plenty of valuable items. He now had a total of 46 mana battle arrays and over 80 bottles of the ancient potion. He had also secured over 100 Tier 3 skill and spell books. Combined, all of these items were even more valuable than the weapons and equipment that had dropped near Poison City. Rather than letting these precious items collect dust in his bag, he distributed them among the team as he had with the weapons and equipment. However, he had chosen 46 Zero Wing members to learn the mana battle arrays. He also decided to give the 50+ Zero Wing members who had entered the Truth Realm 1 ancient potion each. He passed the majority of the remaining 20+ bottles to the Hell Legion, Dark Rhapsody's Blue Rainbow, and Deity Society's Elder Gold. "We get a share, too?" Blue Rainbow asked as Shifeng handed her the potion. The ancient potion permanently improved players' mana control and helped them unlock their mana bodies. Unless one were a fool, they'd recognize how valuable the ancient potion was. Its drop rate was only so high now because they were pioneering Poison City. The drop rate would certainly drop to abysmal lows once this period was over. If it were up to her, she wouldn't share any of the potions with outsiders. "Of course. I already told you that I'm going to help you grow stronger," Shifeng said, nodding. If these were members of other guilds, he wouldn't even give them the ancient potion's remnants. However, the Hell Legion, Dark Rhapsody, and Deity Society were different. They were Zero Wing's allies. It was a pity that the ancient potion's drop rate was so low, and he couldn't afford to give away too many. Otherwise, he would have given Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society more of Zero Wing's share. The monsters they were currently fighting were the weakest in the Poison City's outer reaches. He would have to travel deeper into the secret land if he wanted to obtain the fragment of Solomon's sword. Hence, he decided to help those with high combat standards first. Both Blue Rainbow and Elder Gold were on the cusp of reaching the Domain Realm. If they grew stronger, they could provide a huge boost to the team's overall combat power. The team's dark players grew excited when they heard Shifeng's reply. They hadn't expected to receive any of the ancient potions, but knowing they could earn a small slice of the pie was definitely worth celebrating. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Guild Leader, I found the sealed sword you mentioned inside the city. Fire Dance suddenly reported in the team chat while everyone rested. But what? Shifeng prodded. The fragment of Solomon's sword was inside Poison City. To be precise, it was sealed within the city. If players wanted to claim it, they wouldn't have to go as far as conquering Poison City. They merely need to undo the seal on the sword fragment. Of the fragments Shifeng had yet to obtain, this was the easiest to acquire. After all, this so-called fragment was only a level 100 epic weapon. Solomon's sword was very powerful, but to reach that power, one would have to reproduce it with all 5 of its fragments. This was why the weapon was so hard to reproduce. Even after obtaining 4 fragments, all players would have was 4 epic weapons. Some might not even realize that their epic weapon was, in fact, a fragment of Solomon's sword. But there's a Tier 5 Sword Saint and 2 Tier 4 NPCs guarding the sword. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.